When you think of school today, you probably think of going to school Monday through Friday in a building separate from your house, though, of course, some folks are homeschooled. You spend most of the day at school, learning about subjects such as science, math, English, and history. You probably also enjoy some breaks for recess or sports. This is your experience for most of your childhood, from ages 5 through 18. Most students today attend public schools, though some attend private schools. Public schools are free, which was unheard of for much of history. Because school is available free of charge, people of all socioeconomic statuses, meaning people who are rich, poor, and in between, can go to school and receive an education. During the 12th and 13th centuries, the many social and economic changes which came about in European society helped create an increased interest in education. Burgeoning bureaucratization within both civil and church administrations created the need for educated men with abilities in the area of law. The universities also began to teach medicine. In cities like Bologna, the study of rhetoric and Roman law was useful for both canonists and those who drafted legal documents in secular society. Such a school or stadium during the 12th century drew such people as the great medieval canon lawyer Gratian, Thomas Becket, and Pope Innocent III. It was at this time, also, that the universities slowly began to separate themselves from the firm control of the church. However, as late as 1200, the majority of students were still ecclesiastics. For example, at Bologna, no one could be made a medical doctor without the permission of the archdeacon. In comparison with the time of the Roman Empire, education during the first centuries of the medieval time was in decay, as fighting skills were considered more important. However, the impact of other cultures is still reminded us of the importance of knowledge, and the educational system has been taken under control by the church. Schools established by pagans were closed, and the responsibility for teaching appeared to be in the hands of the representatives of religion. In the Middle Ages, this was not the case. Only the wealthy had access to education, and then usually only for boys. There were no public schools, and those who had the privilege of getting an education usually either learned at home with a tutor or from a school run by the church. Because of this, religion informed every subject that students learned. Some of the things that students learned then might consider superstitions today. What did students study in the Middle Ages? All kinds of things. Just like today, they learned math and grammar, or the study of language, as well as music, art, and science. And they played sports like archery, hammer throwing, horseshoes, and wrestling. Unlike today, most subjects centered around theology or the study of religion. There were also colleges and universities in the Middle Ages. Though, very few students got to attend, unlike today. And remember all the wars and invasions of the Middle Ages? Students would sometimes have their learning interrupted by social upheaval. It's pretty hard to keep learning when there's a war going on. Today, students are protected from the political changes around them, and schools can keep operating like normal. As medieval England began to develop, this system needed to change. The merchant trade in particular was a particularly important sector in this period and required a population that was better educated. This increasing demand for education drove some trading towns to start their grammar schools, which were often funded by wealthy local merchants. Latin grammar was heavily featured in lessons, as it was the language spoken by many merchants who traded across Europe. Dutch and Spanish merchants, for example, did not understand English, but they could converse in Latin. As such, many traders sent their sons to grammar schools to ensure they could continue the business in years to come. Every lesson taught at a grammar school was taught in Latin, and the teaching centered around ensuring the boys were able to recite new information from memory, regardless of whether or not they had understood that information. Sadly, books were incredibly expensive in medieval England, so this was not an option. By the year 1500, there were grammar schools in most of England's larger towns, with one of the oldest located in Maidstone, Kent. Each school was incredibly small, with many only providing a single room for all of the boys attending and their teachers. This teacher would come from a religious background and would focus on teaching the older boys, who would then be tasked with teaching the younger ones. Days varied in length depending on the seasons, with lessons beginning at sunrise and ending at sunset. There was also a culture of discipline in the classrooms, and mistakes could be punished with a birch to ensure they were not made again. If boys succeeded in grammar school, they could then be sent to the university. Oxford and Cambridge universities were both founded during medieval times and were renowned for their teaching, so they were common choices for those who could afford further education. Sadly for peasants, the ability of their sons to gain an education was down to the lord of the manor, who would have to grant permission. In cases where peasants were not given permission, they would face a large fine. Historians have suggested this could have been a way of ensuring peasants remained in their place and were no threat to the feudal system. There were very few girls at normal schools, with wealthy families either homeschooling their daughters or schooling them at another nobleman's home, at home, or abroad. Regardless of their place of learning, daughters of the nobility were all taught the same: how to run a household, how to ensure their husband was looked after, and, if they were lucky, how to play an instrument and sing. In 1330 only about 5% of the population could read or write. It was extremely rare for peasants to be literate. Some lords of the manor had laws banning serfs from being educated. It was usually only the sons from rich families that went to school. There were three main types of schools in the 14th century: the elementary song school, the monastic school, and the grammar school. The elementary song school was usually attached to a large church in a town. At this type of school, young boys were taught to sing Latin hymns and songs. If there was an educated priest available, the boys might learn how to read and write. Monastic schools were for boys being trained for the church. The boys were taught by monks and all lessons were concerned with religious education. Monastic schools sometimes taught local boys from poor families. In exchange for lessons, these boys worked as servants in the monastery. For example, sometimes boys from Yalding were permitted to work at St. Mary Magdalene Priory in Tunbridge. This priory had been established by Richard de Clare in 1140. Grammar schools were usually part of a cathedral or large church. The main concern of these schools was to teach boys Latin grammar. Grammar schools were very similar to the schools established by the Romans. As well as grammar, the boys were taught logic, the art of arguing, and rhetoric, the art of public speaking. They also followed the Roman example of not spending much time on subjects such as mathematics and science. Oxford and Cambridge were the two main centers of learning in England. Founded in the 12th century, these two universities took boys as soon as they were considered to be ready for advanced studies. This meant that some of the boys were as young as 13. Students at Oxford and Cambridge obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree by attending an agreed number of lectures. If they wanted a Master of Arts degree, they had to stay for another 3 years. As well as studying, these students had to become teachers at the university. Elizabeth de Clare, who inherited a third of the family estates after the death of her brother at Bannockburn, took a keen interest in education. After the death of her third husband in 1322, Elizabeth decided against marrying again. Elizabeth was one of the richest women in England. However, unlike a lot of rich people, Elizabeth believed it was important to help the poor. Her accounts show that in one 5-month period she gave help to over 5,000 different people. Of these, 800 received a daily allowance from Elizabeth. Elizabeth de Clare disagreed with the view that serfs should not go to school. She arranged for a large number of people who lived in her villages to be educated. She also paid for those boys who showed talent to be educated at Oxford and Cambridge universities. In 1336, Elizabeth supplied the money for the foundation of Clare College, Cambridge. This provided education for 20 scholars. As well as donating a considerable amount of money, she also became involved in deciding what the students should study. Students at Clare College attended lectures on law, medicine, religion, and the arts. Education in the medieval period made a great leap forward from simple church schools to majestic universities opened during these years. Even though most of the subjects were taught, only mediocre universities have become powerful scientific and research centers that have laid grounds for the further development of science. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more videos.